Tonight, I'm going to be talking to you about a brain disease found in former football players called chronic traumatic encephalitis, which caused the NFL's concussion crisis, how the NFL responded to this crisis, and why it matters in our everyday life. So, in 2017, Dr. Ann McKee studied the brains of 202 former football players. Of these 202 former football players, 111 of them were NFL players, 110 of which were found to have this disease called CTE. Other players were also studied in the study of all different professional levels. So there were semi-professional, college players, and even amateur high school players. Of all the brains studied in this study, it was found that 87% of them had CTE. So what is CTE? CTE is a degenerative disease caused, to the best of our knowledge, by repetitive hits to the head. So it's often found in contact sports, in the military, and it's even been found in survivors of domestic abuse. So it's been found that it's prevalent in football because in football, as neuropsychologist Dr. Robert Stern says, every play of every game of every practice, they're going to be hitting their heads against each other. That's the nature of the game. Those things seem to happen 1,000 to 1,500 times a year. Each time that happens, it's around 20 G's or more, the equivalent of driving your car at 35 miles per hour into a brick wall, 1,000 to 1,500 times a year. So the first cases of this were found in 2003 and 2005, and then in 2006 with players Mike Webster, Terry Long, and Andre Waters. All three players were seen with their quality of life deteriorating in the past few years. All three had attempted suicide, and Terry Long and Andre Waters died by suicide. So those affected by CTE often exhibit changes in mood, changes in behavior, changes in cognitive functioning, and as the disease progresses, they show problems with impulsivity, aggressive behavior, and dementia. So when Dr. Amalu, the doctor who discovered this disease, went public with his findings, the NFL responded poorly. They responded and told him that he should retract his findings and that it was absolutely not based on anything. And this is typical of the NFL's response to the concussion crisis. In 1994, the NFL created its own committee to study brain trauma, and this committee was headed by a rheumatologist. Dr. Pullman, who was the head of the committee, wasn't a neurologist, wasn't a neuropathologist. He was a rheumatologist. So that's something interesting. But also, so this committee released 16 papers in the late 90s, and all of these papers were notorious for saying that there is no link between football and the long-term effects on players' health. In 2007, every player in the NFL received a pamphlet on concussions by the NFL, and the pamphlet said, "Research has not shown that there are any long-term consequences to concussions in players and NFL players." And it wasn't until 2010 that the league admitted that there is a link between concussions and long-term injury. So in 2012, a lawsuit was made against the NFL by 2,000 former players. And in settling this lawsuit in 2013 for 4,500 players at that point of previous NFL players, the NFL settled and gave money to players who giving them concussion-related compensation, medical research for retired NFL players, fund medical exams, litigation expenses. But in this, the NFL didn't admit guilt to, they admitted no negligence on their part for these injuries. Mark Fairnew-Wanda explains, "There was no admission whatsoever of guilt by the league. The league makes it very clear that they're not admitting any guilt, and also no acknowledgement of causation between football and the possibility of long-term brain damage." And that was a prominent part of their 2013 settlement. So why this matters? It's a big deal that the NFL acted this way. Chris Nowinski, an advocate of CTE, explains in an interview with Frontline, As long as the NFL dismissed this, that meant that parents were signing their kids up to go play football, believing that there was no risk. That wasn't fair to those kids, or parents, and especially to the kids. So the Mayo Clinic studied 66 non-professional male amateur athletes, those who had never played professional sports in their lives, but who had played contact sports growing up. They found that 32% of the 66 males who they studied, who had participated in contact sports growing up, showed CTE when brain tissue was examined. Dr. Robert Cantu, co-founder of CTE Center at the Boston University, explains why kids are more at risk for playing contact sports than adults. With what we know about the youth brain, it's more easily disrupted than the adult brain. It's lighter in weight and has less inertia to put it into motion, so you can tap it and the brain will move much quicker with a hit than an adult brain. I think we should be treating youths differently. While the risk of CTE is still not completely known for younger adults playing contact sports, we need to take this risk of brain trauma in contact sports seriously, and the way we think about repetitive hits in sports. The NFL can play a big role in this. If the NFL becomes more transparent about the risk of repetitive hits in contact sports, we can figure out a culture as a whole to make sports safer for everyone. Thank you.